Welcome to the Jewish Diasporist, a podcast exploring the political, social, and cultural implications of life in diaspora. We are your hosts, Ben Yanowitz.
And Zach Smerin, coming to you this time with this Shina Punim out. Ben and Jordan were already on the Seekers of Unity episode, but this time I get to be the man in front of the camera. Welcome, everyone. We decided to record something short just for our anniversary.
Yeah,
It's been a long year, and it's been a blast, honestly, from me. How has it been for you? How's it been for you, Ben?
it's been a really good experience. I'm really glad to be able to do this episode reflecting on this past year of work because we've done a lot of work with this. We've learned a lot. We've reached people around the world, which has been a really incredible and fulfilling experience. And we've really developed and articulated different understandings of diasporism that I think is exactly fulfilling that goal that we had of trying to help lay the groundwork of defining this term. And this is something that's been a challenge at times because we often use the term and take it for granted that there still is no dictionary definition. So today, one of our goals in this brief reflection episode of the Jewish Diasporist is to go down to our definitions of diasporism, the one we provided in the very first episode, which was something that Zach and I generated together based on our own understandings of it, and then to our more recent definition, which is diasporism on its own, no qualifiers as a dictionary definition. And we're going to go to those terms, to those definitions, and put them next to each other, understand the differences, and think, what are we missing in these as well? And then we're going to end our conversation with a look ahead that will help us think about the future of the Jewish Diasporist, what our goals are for this upcoming year. So thank you so much for joining us in this first year of our work. It's been genuinely a pleasure, as Zach was saying. And we're excited to be able to continue doing this work and continue providing detailed, nuanced, exploratory conversations with diasporists, Jewish, non-Jewish, and some people that are not necessarily diasporists, but have life stories that can tell us a bit about what it might mean to be a diasporist in this upcoming year.
It's really been, yeah, I remember when we first started thinking about how can we continue our work after the Union of Jewish Students Conference in February 2023. And it was Ben who came up with the idea of a podcast. I have to 100% cede the ground of the idea to him. And in the beginning, I wasn't even sure, like, isn't that complicated? Like, will we have things to say? Will I be awkward in front of the microphone? The answer to all of these questions has been yes. But despite the challenges, I think that we've done a very good job in being able to have a wide range of perspectives that really are not highlighted, at least not in the way that we try and highlight it. Not just including Jewish communal voices from around the world, because plenty of people do that. Plenty of people around the world engage with their local communities. But for us, really, the crux of idea was to not just approach Jewish communal voices around the world as existing for just in a neutral environment, but which through their existence really act in a way that we can think that I'm even struggling to think of the words now. And unlike in an audio only episode, I can't cut out.
I'll
However, no,
actually even I'll add
it's about being conscious, right? It's that consciousness that I think is
yeah.
important. You know, we are in the diaspora, or we are around the world in our identity. We are confident. We want to build on that.
Yeah, and I would add, this is kind of teasing. We're going to go over some statistics and talk about our quantitative growth and where we stand at this point in this new year. But before I say that, I just want to add on to this point that you're raising. We've made a tradition almost of asking at the very beginning of each of our interviews about people's family histories. And I think as both historians, that's very conscious because so often we're told a history of the Jews, of Americans, of Poles, or frankly, of all national communities that is very flattening of family narratives, of these histories that are very personal, but at the same time are deeply, deeply influential on the way history is actually written, on the life choices that people make, and frankly, from the diasporist perspective, where their ancestors, or sorry, where their descendants end up. So by asking this question, it really gets to the crux of the reason of why we understand we're doing the interviews in the way we're doing them, because we are complicating the narrative of the Jewish people in a way that I think emphasizes the plurality, the heterogeny of Jewish narratives, and shows that there isn't one grand narrative, but many not so grand narratives. And sometimes they are grand, but sometimes it's more just a family history, like Zevi raised in our last episode, about how one small relationship with a Hasidic community coming through, or a Hasidic, yeah, Hasidic community coming through a town can entirely push a family towards that in a different for generations to come. And that's really important to emphasize as historians and as just people that want to understand how the world gets to the place that it's at, because it's not about grand narratives of large national groups that think like a collective hive mind, because that's obviously not the way history works. We're individuals, even if we are identifying with something bigger than ourselves.
We are approaching this from a very postmodernist perspective. No grand narratives, no large perspectives in that regard. Ben highlighted out a very nice. Ben created a very nice outline for this short episode that we're going to try and keep relatively short, and I've taken us off track. When it comes to what we came up with trying to explain in our first episode what diasporism is, we came up with this, and I'm looking to the side, so I'm not saying it off by heart. Diasporism is the belief that diaspora is not just a state from which one needs to ascend, but one in which cultural and communal fulfillment can be achieved to its highest perceptible level. This stands in opposition to the ethno-nationalist conception of self-determination that allocates one piece of land to one national or ethnic group. Diasporism supports other, more diverse forms of communal self-management around the world and across different communities as well. And I remember us trying to craft this before that first episode, coming up with something for a word that hasn't been defined in the dictionary yet. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, to not be institutionalized in that sense. If we are speaking without grand narratives, then it makes sense that a word can be something that we imagine it to be. And for us, this imagination or has brought us this definition. I still strongly resonate with it. I remember it fondly. But we thought about something a little bit more recent, something a bit more succinct.
Yeah. And in
Which
this one,
was, what was
we
it?
use differently. We've used this specifically to try to isolate the term diasporism as something that's not just Jewish and not just socialist as we understand it. Because we understand diasporism as something that can lead towards an internationalist outlook, an internationalist identity. But we also understand that that's coming from qualifiers that we add to our diasporism. So we tried to isolate diasporism on its own, and that led us to define diasporism as the affirmation of one's home in diaspora, while communally or potentially individually engaging with and developing one's cultural roots. And this one is, of course, going to be a lot less expansive because it's on its own. Trying to have like a dictionary definition is going to be much less holistic in how we understand diasporism as an ideological worldview and position. But besides that, what would you say is the main difference between these two understandings, Zach?
The length. No, I think, yeah, the what you highlighted specifically about one trying to become abstract, more abstract, away from the Jewish framework in and of itself, because while the former understanding the question of opposition to ethno-nationalism, that is something that is different depending on the context of different groups that have a long-standing history of statehood, ones that have a long-standing history in diaspora, and what are the origins of that diaspora. This is what our great friend at the New York Times, who interviewed us for an article and then didn't include us. Not salty, by the way. Uh,
We're gonna name drop him.
Talked about. I mean, sure, Mr.
Might as
Mark
well.
Tracy. Hello, Mark. Shout out. No, it's something that that is very much a difference in terms of how we understand the perception of, for example, the Palestinian diaspora, and that's not something that can be avoided. But I like both the definitions. I think that they both hint at a perception that is quite instinctual in Jewish communities. In some other communities that might not have such a history of diaspora, or in which diaspora is, like for many Jews, only associated with exile, that might not be as instinctive. But I think certainly for the tradition that we come from, it is something that is not just, that points towards not just being a neutral understanding of we happen to be here. There's not much more to it, but more conscious. We are here. We have the right to be here. That doesn't. There is no exclusivity regarding ethnicity, nationality, and territory.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that's something that we need as a positive outlook towards Jewish progressive politics around the world.
Yeah.
That yeah.
And I would even say that like there is a benefit in having this shorter, isolated definition of diasporism that we've put out more recently because it allows us to add different qualifiers to it that can help us demonstrate how this term has relevance beyond the Jewish community. I know in this article or in the interview we had with Mark Tracy, it randomly happened, but I ended up using the term comfortable diasporism to describe a diasporism that is
Yep.
fully comfortable in its home in diaspora and doesn't feel any necessary reliance upon a separate homeland elsewhere. And this was in regard to the Palestinian diaspora, saying that the Palestinians are not able to have a comfortable diasporism because they don't have a right of return. And if you don't have freedom of movement, then it can never truly be a comfortable diasporism. And I do think that having this isolated definition and being able to provide different qualifiers to it does allow us to demonstrate how diasporism is relevant and held by many people unconsciously. And for me, that's really helpful in demonstrating how our socialist Jewish diasporism can inform these other types of diasporism and diaspora politics. And that is something that I think is really important to have. But at the same time, this older definition we have, I think emphasizes some of these other uh, elements of our of our socialist Jewish diasporism that are left out in it as well. So beyond these definitions, Zach, what do you think? What else do we associate with diasporism? Are there any other practices or specific values? I know for me, one thing that we left out in the first episode's definition is, and something that I've always understood as part of diasporism, is a radical intercultural exchange. And in our last episode with Zevi, we talked a lot about translation. And this can be language translation, but also the translation of ideas across different contexts. And I understand translation as a diasporist act as something where you have different communities living, coexisting together, and you are going to have these intercultural exchange and dialogue that I think both parties are going to grow from. And I understand that as part of diasporism and have for a long time. Is there anything else we might want to add to that?
I would add in the context of nation states, there is a somewhat of an obsession amongst the far right in most countries, but specifically when it comes to the European context, about maintaining a majority, being the majority ethnic group, or at the very least having a comfortable majority. Because when you talk about majority, it's not usually, we have to keep 51, 52%. It's usually much, much higher than that. Which is only something that is going to become more more of a discourse as global migrations are going to inevitably increase, um, if only due to climate change and forced migrations and wars that are going to unfortunately accompany it. And that's always something that for me has made me feel uncomfortable about discourse relating to the state of Israel, about needing to maintain a Jewish majority, or because if that doesn't, um, if that isn't the case, then that makes Jewish life under threat. And there are a lot of people in that who view, who come from it from a very sort of uh, pragmatic perspective, I would say, that in order to have a safe space, that there needs to be a Jewish majority. And I understand it. I understand it from the perspective of the world that they come, usually one that accepts the post-World War II realities and says that in the world that we have, in an ethno-nationalist world, we should have our own ethno-national state. And I think I can understand it, but I nevertheless disagree with it on principle. I don't like policies that are supposed to maintain demographic majorities. I think that that's something that a diasporist understanding of the world is comfortable with.
Yeah,
If
and I
it's the
think
case that there is a majority or a minor that becomes a minority, um, depending on the processes that take place, that the understandings of what is the majority and what is the minority might cease to become relevant. And I don't think that there's anything that should be that we should be inherently afraid of with that. So I would say that I associate that with diasporism.
yeah, no, I think that's definitely a big part of it, recognizing that we can have self-determination that isn't bound to land and domination of that land, I think is tied to what you're saying, where we don't need to have a majority to lay claim to having a home where we live. We can have a home as a tiny minority, as just a few people living there. We don't need to belong to some ethno-national community that has this mythical ancestral connection to the land. Because at the end of the day, we don't own land. Land is here before we were born. Land will be here after we're gone. It's a matter of our communities and how they relate to each other as different ethno-cultural groups on the same land. And it matters with how these communities are able to exercise a form of self-determination that isn't necessarily just national politics, nationalism. And we do say in this first definition, other more diverse forms of communal self-management. And that can mean a lot of different things. That can mean a lot of different things. If we're just contrasting it to ethno-nationalist self-determination, it can also even mean just civic nationalism. Civic nationalism being a nationalism tied to a specific nation state rather than a ethno-cultural group. And well, I've heard one person call that nation stateism, which I think is something that as diasporists we also oppose. I think I've always understood diasporism as a way to kind of help us move towards a stateless society while maintaining uh, genuine democratic communal institutions that can allow us to have this cultural fulfillment wherever we live. And that is going to look very different in different places, as you mentioned with climate refugees. If you're climate change refugees, where an entire island nation might go underwater because of rising sea levels, you're going to have refugees that no longer have a place that they can call their nation, but they're nevertheless still a nation. And I've always understood nation, not always, especially in the last couple of years with my research in history, I've understood nations to not be the place, but the people. And then say you live in Kiribati or Tuvalu and your nation goes underwater, it doesn't mean you can't still have national self-determination. It does mean that that's going to have to change. It's going to have to take a different form. And I think it's key to thinking about these alternative non-territorial forms of self-determination, whether that is going to happen through some form of e-democracy or some form of national personal autonomy, it's going to look very different. And I want us to move a little bit towards wrapping up this conversation in the next few minutes. But I know we talked about going over some statistics to share where we're at quantitatively. Do you have any
Yeah,
points before we move to that?
speaking of land, and listeners will have to forgive us. Usually, when we are just recording our voices, we're able to communicate with each other visually and say, I want to raise my hand. I want to. So otherwise, it might. It's something that we're getting used to. We're also beginning this. Some people, some of the messages that we get from people making out as, oh, we're so professional. And or even people feeling a little bit um, shook about being able to speak to us. And part of me just wants to revel in that, say, oh yeah, we are so professional, right? But then on the other hand, it's just the two of us that have our microphones and being able to call. So, and I think, yeah, we absolutely need to stay to that down to earth, um, that down to earth relationship with our listeners. So, and if you do have any sort of comments towards us, then that's also something that we're always very keen to hear from. If you have any thoughts,
Yeah. I mean,
contact at jewishdiasporist.com.
I might add that we've some of the most fulfilling moments of this year have been receiving messages from some listeners. And we really love all the messages that we receive, and it really reminds us why we continue to do this work.
Mm-hmm. So, in terms of our statistics, we are able to track more or less the locations where people listen to us from, at least from the last 6 months, as well as some all-time statistics. We are nearing on 5,000 downloads. If you don't know what that means exactly, what counts as a download, what doesn't, don't worry. Neither does the website we run our podcast through. It's a very arbitrary statistic, but when it goes up, it makes us happy. And so I have a list of countries where people have listened to us. And Ben, you are able to say, since a large percentage of our listeners come from the great US of A,
Yeah.
perhaps which states people listen to us
Oh, the thing is,
from
it's
or
easier
don't
to,
listen to us from. Yeah, it'll be
yeah.
easier to say which ones don't.
I'll
Would you
just
like,
say we
would,
have
yeah.
43 states out of 50,
Mm-hmm.
because it's much easier to say the ones we don't have listens, downloads in. I'll just say the majority or the largest numbers are going to be in the states of California, and New York, and the Eastern Seaboard. There's like a big mega city region in the East Coast that we have a lot of downloads in. And the ones we don't have, so sorry, we're not going to name all the ones we have because 43 states is a lot, but we don't have any downloads in Wyoming, North or South Dakota, Mississippi, South Carolina, or Alaska. I believe that was the seven,
Shame on you, Alaska.
or West
I'm sorry.
Virginia, because
Now,
there's a
West
states,
Virginia.
yeah, there's a lot of states we've reached, and it's really wonderful to be able to visualize all the different people we've reached. And people use the word parasocial often towards podcasters, but I might say that we have some sort of parasocial relationship with all of you guys as well, because it really does fulfill and lift us up to know that there's people around the world that care about the stuff we're saying, that this idea of diasporism resonates with, and can help us better understand where we stand as Jews in diaspora and the values that we associate with this history and legacy of diaspora.
Mm-hmm. When you said it'd be easier to name the ones when we haven't had downloads in, that reminded me of Breaking Bad. Mike gets asked which licenses does he have, which states does he have the license to carry, and he just says, "Be easy to name the ones we don't." So, bravo, Vince. In terms of now that we've got the most the most important country in the world out of the way, let's let's name all the countries that people have listened to us. These are in no particular order, apart from the ones that I noted down from the map. So it's not alphabetical. It's not in terms of how many downloads we've had. Some of these there's been more of, as you can imagine, but Yeah, that we can also tally those statistics up at some point in the near future. So let's start with North America. United States. It reminds me of Animaniacs. You know, the United States, Canada, Mexico. Yeah. So US, Canada, Mexico, Costa Rica, Colombia, Brazil, and Chile. That's the Western Hemisphere. Moving on to Africa, Egypt, Cameroon, and South Africa. Very interested about that one in Cameroon. And bear in mind, some of these may be VPNs, or it may be um, mistakes that happen. When it comes to Cameroon, I looked up on Wikipedia how many Jews are officially listed, and it's 12. So, and we've had 8 downloads. There we go. Cameroon's going to be the only country where I'm going to name how many downloads we've got. And bear in mind the only main Jewish communal event, again according to the Wikipedia page, in Cameroon takes place at the Shabbos dinner of the Israeli ambassador. So that's the Israeli embassy in I think it's Douala is heavily infiltrated by Jewish diasporist listeners. Moving on to Europe, and here we're going to have a lot of countries. So Portugal, Spain, France, Ireland, and that includes all of Ireland, Iceland, Norway, Sweden, Finland, clean sweep of of Scandinavia, Denmark as well. Russia. I was wondering whether or not we can reach Russia at this point, but yes. Ukraine, Belgium, Netherlands, no Luxembourg yet, but Italy, Monaco, Polska, Poland, Czechia or the Czech Republic, Hungary, Serbia, Romania, Croatia, North Macedonia, Bulgaria, and Greece.
Think you
Don't think I'm
missed
missing anything.
Germany and the UK. We have a lot of
Oh
downloads in the
yeah.
UK. It's one
Oh
of our
yeah.
main
I
centers.
only missed the 2 largest
Yeah,
countries.
right.
Yeah, Germany and UK. That includes Scotland and Wales.
Hmm.
Um, then in the largest continent, we've got Georgia, Oman, India, Japan, China, Thailand, Singapore, and Israel Palestine. And in last but certainly not least, we have at the edge of the world, from our perspective at least, Australia and New Zealand. Notable mention, not on this list, because I wasn't exactly sure how to categorize it, is Guernsey in the Channel
Yeah,
Islands.
yeah. We
So
could connect that to the UK because it is politically connected to the UK.
sure, sure.
We actually
Yeah,
had Guernsey before we had France. It was like we were getting so close, but we hadn't penetrated the borders.
there was a point where like France was surrounded by other countries that had downloads. Oh, I forgot Switzerland. Switzerland
Switzerland,
as
of
well.
course.
And I forget Austria. Oh no.
Ooh,
I'm gonna be I'm in
I think
trouble.
you might have named it. But so
Yeah.
we're already over the time limit we wanted to have. So I just want to have this last little question that we can just give a few teasers of what's to come. And that is, what kind of conversations do we want to be having in our new year? I'd say just off the top of my head, I want to start really engaging with more non-Jewish diasporisms because I think diasporism is something that's for us coming directly out of the Jewish experience. But so I was talking to Zach beforehand. I have a friend who's part of the Albanian diaspora, which is a long history. And there's many different communities that have long histories of diaspora that I'd really like to start engaging with. Not to mention the Roma. I would love to have someone to
Yeah.
talk to
Oh
from the
yeah.
Roma community because that's another fascinating and important diaspora, or the Armenian diaspora, these histories that are really central and can, I think, tell us a lot about diasporism and things that we haven't necessarily engaged with or learned from. So if you have any specific people we could interview in mind, we'd really love to be able to
Mhm.
explore that with people.
I really enjoy our episodes looking at communities where we don't expect there to be Jewish voices from in mainstream communal discussions. And that's why, to this day, the first Summer You episode holds a special place in my heart, not just because I made it, but in terms of the interviews, the several interviews of people from communities there, people from North Macedonia, from Turkey, from Greece. Shout out to the guys from Greece, and yeah, just looking at environments where we don't think there are communities from, but of course there are, and there is huge Jewish diversity that should be celebrated and deserves a wider attention. One day maybe we will get a the download from the one Jewish guy in Greenland, uh, it or game to speak. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, in terms of episodes that we have lined up, there are some episodes that we want to make about specifically Jews of color and those perspectives. It was something that we very early on wanted to include, and then it just never came to be. And
Yeah.
it's really been too long, and we need to absolutely address that and make an integral part of our of our show.
Yeah, and that's
That
definitely
word
really
show is a bit
important.
like,
Yeah, it's
I
really
don't like that
important to be
word,
able to
but
do
yeah.
that. And we've definitely had some lots of conversations about that. And we have some contacts that we've already recorded with upcoming, others that we have some interviews lined up, others that we know some people that we'd like to schedule interviews with. And that definitely
Mhm.
will be coming up in the future. And one last point is that we want to do a lot more episodes with others in the Jewish media ecosystem, the Jewish left media ecosystem, have more collaborations. We started some collaborations with making mentions, and we want to do a lot more stuff like that because we really love to be able to connect with others doing similar work to us and to be able to emphasize and highlight the different perspectives we might have and really be able to build something with them, to be able to actually hear people out, have these respectful conversations, learn from them, learn from each other, and ultimately be able to move towards some kind of growth on the Jewish left, where we're able to
Yeah.
have these hard, nuanced discussions that are difficult to have, especially in this specific climate that we're living in right now.
hmm In terms of the places where that can take place, YouTube is something that we have a lot of hope for in terms of where the possibilities for collabs are easier to do. If you haven't yet subscribed, please do to the channel that we have with Making Mentures. There are a lot of opportunities there. We're not going to say too much more at this stage, but we have some ideas and plans. So do stay tuned. Um, Subscribe, uh, rate. We don't mention this, but absolutely rate our podcast. It's the first thing that comes up if you're on Spotify, and you can see more or less how many people listen. It's something that helps a lot in that sense. If you can donate on Patreon, please do. That really
Yeah, we
helps us
are
out.
we are really trying to become sustainable because this has been actively a financial burden, but one we're happy to be taking on, and really trying to make this work more sustainable for us going forward.
We're able to continue. Don't worry. We're not going to shut down due to financial reasons, but it's we're not fishing in that way. But it becomes much easier for us if we do have some support. So that's always really appreciated. And yeah, what else can we say? I
I mean,
guess,
if you, on the last point, I guess it was not quite the last point, but if you are someone doing similar work to us or have something that you'd like to say and feel like you have something to bring to this podcast, please reach out because we really do love to receive everything we can from our listeners, our supporters, and to actually be able to engage with y'all. A lot of you guys have really important and really unique and interesting life experiences, and we really want to be able to highlight those. We can't, I think, as Zach has said in the past, we can't necessarily get to everyone, but we'd really like to be able to engage with more of our listeners, especially if you have something to add to this buffet of different topics that we've been engaging with so far.
All right, then. In that case, it's approaching our anniversary. Well, when we release this, it's going to be our anniversary. For us, it's still a few days beforehand, but I'm just going to toast
L'chaim. Thank you
Not
so
sponsored.
much. Of
Thank you so
course.
much.